If you have a Bible, we're going to be looking very briefly at Hebrews chapter 12, the first couple of verses. There we find these words, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God." If you're a high school junior, I want you to stand up for just a minute. High school juniors, where are you? Stand up. Stay standing for just a minute. You don't need to clap for them yet. 25 years ago, in 1989, a book was written by Diane Ravitch and Chester Finn, which rocked American academia. The book was entitled this, "What Do Our 17-Year-Olds Know?" I'm not going to quiz you this morning. That might be a little too embarrassing. You can sit down. It assessed how much, well, it's really two areas, how much historical knowledge and knowledge of literature high school juniors had retained after 11 years of schooling. And the results were so poor, so shocking, that the government began a program in public schools on a federal level to make up for what they saw as significant deficits. Just a couple of years ago, 25 years later, a New York Times journalist sought to assess how we doing. After 25 years, how much progress have we made? After 25 years of specialized programs emphasizing history and literature, what's the result? Here's the title of his article. It read, "Survey finds juniors are ignorant of basic facts of history and literature." His shocking conclusion was this: after 25 years of special emphasis, not only are our juniors ignorant, but not only has no progress been made, but they're actually worse off than they were 25 years ago. 33, and this is what I would have loved to have done if we had a little more time, 33 multiple choice questions were given to 1,200 high school juniors from across a cross-section of America. Less than 1/3 knew in which century the war between the states took place. Now that might throw you off. It's also known as the Civil War, but any student of history knows there was nothing civil about it. In the South, we solved that problem by calling it what it was, the War of Northern Aggression. 1/4 said that Columbus sailed the ocean blue not in 1492, but after 1750. 1/3 had no clue where the phrase "life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness" came from. Only 1/4 of them knew who the chancellor was in Germany during World War II. Hitler, by the way, in case you're wondering. Now, thankfully, you don't have that problem, do you? No. Thankfully, you don't. But the problem, as teachers, the problem goes far deeper than just information. The problem isn't just a problem of information, it's actually a problem of application. And this is what I want to focus on this morning. If you do not understand the significance of history, you will not understand your significance, where you fit in, and you will waste your life. One historian has written this, and you may have heard, your high school teachers may have, your history teachers may have quoted this for you. George Santayana has written, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." But you know what? When you read Scripture, one of the things you're going to find is this: God is deeply concerned with history. It is not a lack of knowledge, it's not just a lack of information, it's a lack of application. In other words, He stresses history because what's important to Him is that you know where you fit in His plan. Has it ever struck you that when you read the Bible, as there's a shift from one major patriarch to another, you know what God does? He stops and gives a history lesson. 9 times he tells Moses, I am the God of your father Abraham. You look at the phrase, I am the God who brought you out of Egypt, and you'll find it in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, Chronicles, Nehemiah, Psalms, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and all the minor prophets. Does history matter to God? Absolutely. God keeps saying, remember what I have done. Now, this is who you are and what you are to do. So this morning, I want to do the impossible. I want to take us all back to the beginning of time, give you an edited version of history, and show you where you fit in 15 minutes. So buckle your seatbelts. Here we go. In the beginning, God. How many of you believe that was the beginning? It actually wasn't. It wasn't the beginning. It's just the beginning of all that was created. But God has always existed. He's always been before there was a heaven, before there was hell, before there were angels, before there were demons. Before anything was, God was. He didn't need heaven. He didn't need angels. He didn't need anybody to help him. He was completely and utterly perfect in himself. Theologians call it the doctrine of aseity. It's a great Scrabble word, by the way, but it's one of the most undertaught doctrines. It simply means this: God was absolutely, perfectly self-contained. But he needs nothing, but he wants something. He lacks nothing. He's utterly satisfied, but he has one want, one desire. He wanted to create something outside himself to which he could relate. And so he began with a realm of angels. Now, when we think of angels, we think of something, well, not quite male and, well, not quite female. Something around, like Casper the Friendly Ghost. Get rid of that picture. It's the farthest thing from the truth. They're big, they're majestic, they're intimidating, they're fearsome, they're smarter, faster, and more beautiful than anyone in this room, including Mr. Beebe. One day, some of those angels looked at God and said, no. Has it ever occurred to you that there is no plan to redeem them? No hope. I say this respectfully, but if I were running the universe, I'd redeem them, not us. Then God makes a second realm of beings, humans, and in creation, they're perfect. Now, I have no idea what a perfect human being looks like. Think Daniel Craig or Lindsay Lohan, something in between there. But they're perfect. The climate's perfect, the atmosphere's perfect, the world's perfect, and they too turn to God and say, no. But think about it. God gives them a plan to be redeemed. If I were running the universe, my Bible would be about that thick. I would have gotten to that point in time and said, game over. This was really, really a bad idea. But God turns to his creation and he says, no, I will not destroy you. Instead, in Genesis 3:15, we hear the promise of a rescuer. His name, at that point, all we know is he. That's all he's called. Genesis 3:15, someone who will come to rescue them. He'll come, he'll defeat Satan and death to do what they should have done and now can't. He says, I can no longer walk with you. And so he places 2 angels at the Garden of Eden and says, stay out, because if you come near me, my holiness will consume you. But the rest of the Bible, the rest of history, is God drawing near to his people. God keeping his promise to send a rescuer. So we leave Adam and Eve and we go to the next patriarch, Noah. How close did God get to Noah? Actually, not that close if you think about it. There is no record in the Bible that Noah ever saw God. He only heard a voice, and the voice told him to build an ark as large as the Wells Fargo Center. It was near no known body of water, and some theologians argue that it hadn't even rained on the earth at that point. Yeah, how's that for a calling? So Noah gets the information, and God never speaks to him again for 120 years. And then he says, "Get in." And his hand shuts the door. You know, I might have made it about a week before I would have started asking questions or thinking things like, I did have a greasy cheesesteak. Maybe it was just indigestion. I mean, did I really hear God's voice? Maybe it was the Mexican food too. I don't know. How do I know it was really God? But God wanted to get closer still. As we leave Noah and we go to Abraham. Abraham receives divine visitors one day, and one of them is described as the angel of the Lord. No other angel in the Bible ever receives worship except this one angel. And that's the reason why most theologians believe this is the appearance. It's called a pre-incarnate theophany. That's a little too long for Scrabble. But it basically means this. It's a before Jesus put skin on and came to this earth appearance of God. Think about it. God, in human form, puts his knees under Abraham's table. A little closer still, but he leaves. We go ahead to the next major patriarch, Moses. He tells Moses, "Build me a seat." And thanks to Harrison Ford and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, we all know what it looks like. It's a golden box with acacia poles running along its sides, winged angels on top. And he was told to build a tent around it and then an outer court around it. And when it was done, a pillar of cloud and smoke settled down on this seat. And the Psalms tell us that it was large enough that it heated 2 million people in the deserts at night when it gets cold. And during the day, the cloud was so huge that it shaded 2 million people from 120-degree plus heat. God was now in their midst. But God wanted to get closer still. David asked, "Lord, may I build you a house?" God says, "No, you've slept with another man's wife and you've committed mass murder." He says, "But I'll let your son build it." And so Solomon built the temple. It takes him 70 years, 183,000 workers. And 1 Kings 6 tells us that never was a hammer heard on the Temple Mount, meaning all the stones, all the wood was cut somewhere else, schlepped to Jerusalem, and dropped into place like the pyramids in Egypt. God now has an address, 100 Temple Mount Plaza, Jerusalem, meaning anybody can come and see him. Anybody. But you know what they did? Ezekiel tells us that they put pornographic pictures in the temple. In the temple. They put evil depictions of humans and gods, and they bowed down and worshiped them instead of the true and living God. God says, "Stop it or I'll leave." They didn't, and he left. The whole rest of the Old Testament is one prophet after another saying basically one message: come back to God, and he'll come back to you. The Old Testament ends with the prophet Malachi, and then there's still 400 years of silence before the beginning of the New Testament. And John the Baptist comes and says, "I have come to make straight the paths of the Lord. I will make the low place high, the high places low. I have come to prepare the way for him." The Apostle John begins his gospel, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." In verse 14, we know says the word tabernacled. King James gets it best here. The word tabernacled among us. What John prepared us for, what John the Apostle is saying is this: he's back. He's back. The God who walked in the garden now walks with his disciples, and this is the promised one, the one who would defeat all evil, reverse all that's broken in this life. This is finally what God wanted, right? Wrong. You won't understand the power of the gospel unless you get this. Leave it to the God of the Bible to take us beyond Eden. After the death of Jesus for our sins, after his resurrection giving us new life, after the ascension, crowning him as Lord of all, he sends his Spirit, and Paul writes this, not Christ with you, but Christ in you, the hope of glory. Do you get it? You remember when in Acts 2, when the Spirit blows into the room, the fire splits into little fires and rests on each of their heads. If Moses had been there, he'd start leaping and dancing, saying, do you realize what this means? The fire, the smoke. You, Christians, you are the tabernacle. You are the temple. You are the place where God dwells. It's exactly what Paul and Peter write, and when the disciples got it, they would talk to anybody with two legs and breathed. It transformed them. And listen, within 30 years, those who heard it transformed an entire empire. The last apostle dies in 90 AD, and we now jump to 321 AD, not because there weren't anything happened, but it's a significant shift. Constantine becomes the emperor and a Christian. He declares as an emperor, now that I'm a Christian, everyone who is in my kingdom is also a Christian, which is about as effective as me going to Abingdon Memorial Hospital and saying, because I say it, you are all healed. This doesn't have that kind of authority. And what it meant to be a Christian began to decline from 321 to 1521. It's called the Dark Ages, the medieval period. Apathy began to plague the church. God sent some wonderful people in those years. St. Francis of Assisi, Teresa of Avila. There's some wonderful saints. Don't get me wrong, but in 1517, a lawyer, a fat lawyer, with serious gastrointestinal problems, is driving home and lightning blows him off his horse. He's so scared he prays, Saint Anne, save me, and I'll become a monk. He thought she did, and so he does become a monk. His name, Martin Luther. His initial understanding of God's treatment of sin leads him to pay for his own sins, listen to this, by beating himself senseless, unconscious, with a whip. Staupitz, his mentor, says, Martin, study the Scriptures. And he did. And when he got to Romans 1:17, his life was transformed by this. The just will live by faith. Meaning, what he finally understood is that those who are made righteous not by their own deeds, but by something that someone else has done for them. He writes 95 theses in Latin, hangs them on the Schlosskirche in Wittenberg, which sounds weird, but it's the 16th century of a Facebook news feed. Everyone saw it because they went to confession every day. It just so happened that his theses got published because a guy named Gutenberg had just invented a thing called the printing press. And before he realized it, a revolution was taking place, a spiritual one. A little-known organist by the name of Johann Sebastian Bach becomes a Christian, a Dutch painter by the name of Rembrandt. It affects a brilliant man by the name of Jean Calvin. Calvin has tremendous influence on a man named John Knox. Knox crosses the British Channel, spends time with Calvin, goes back to the not yet British Isles, and writes a government document which says, the Queen isn't the head of the church. Jesus is. Bloody Mary isn't. Rather, the church is to be ruled by presbyters, elders, meaning broken-hearted, saved men whose hearts are so burning with the gospel, prayer, and the word. Those who stood with Knox were persecuted, like Luther, for being those who protested anything that wasn't found in the Bible, now known as Protestants. Many left for a new land called America and began settling up and down the East Coast. And one preacher up north by the name of Jonathan Edwards preaches sermons like this. Sinners in the hands of an angry God, and revival breaks out. A preacher in the South by the name of George Whitefield was forced into the fields, and revival breaks out. Not the sort of revival that you see, posted on church signs. Revival, 6 p.m. at our church on Saturday. Come. No, these were revivals where humans don't control it in the least. It's when God comes, transforms people who have a shallow view of their own sin or a misunderstanding of grace, and He transforms them into the most humble, the most broken, the most passionate teachers, preachers, livers of the gospel. One historian, Edwin Orr, recalls that one revival, it so transformed the culture, it shut down the mining industry because the mules didn't understand their owners anymore because their owners stopped cussing at them. And they didn't know what to do. Church attendance in New York City in one church went from 40 to 4,000. Police no longer had crime to fight, so they formed singing quartets and started worship services. Now, just regarding Presbyterian history, my history, there was in the U.S. basically at that point one church, and then something happened in 1861 to divide the nation. That's right, the War of Northern Aggression. Church split between North and South, but something affected both churches far worse than the war between the states. It was called post-Enlightenment theological liberalism. That also doesn't fit on a Scrabble board. It was a movement largely started in Germany, swept through Princeton, Harvard, Yale, and it was marked by people, very simply put, who said, "You don't actually believe the Bible, do you? Come on. I mean, we're all enlightened, modern people. Don't be so naive." But there were groups who believed. One of those taught at Princeton was a man by the name of J.G. Machen. He taught and influenced a man by the name of Cornelius Van Til, who in 1940 organized a Christian Society of Willow Grove. In September of 1943, that became a school, and in 1956 it became Phil-Mont Christian Academy. Now, why do I tell you all this? I want you to imagine yourself in a relay race. You've got your hand behind you, waiting for that baton. Then it hits your hand. You need to understand something about this baton. It has blood all over it. There are men and women who have died to get this to your generation. Now imagine that when it hits your hand, you then look over your shoulder to the men or the women who have influenced you, whose fingerprints are all over your life, who have transformed you by the power of the gospel. And you begin to look over their shoulder. And then over their shoulder, and you might see a Billy Graham and maybe a Billy Sunday. And there's Dwight Moody. Who's that fat guy back there? Oh, that's Martin Luther. Oh, and there's Chris, there's Augustine. And then way back there, you see a long-haired rabbi with hard-sandaled feet yelling, "Run! Run!" If you're like me, your reaction is, me? Me? I'm a blubbering idiot that can't even make it through a Little House episode without crying. Me? Run. Run. Can I have the faculty and administration stand up for just a minute? Look around at these people. Can I tell you what's happening to me? And I'm almost 40 years old. Now, I'm probably younger than many of you standing up, but I'm older and hopefully than all of you sitting down. But the older I get, each time a hero of mine, whether Edmund Clowney, James Montgomery Boyce, each time a hero of mine dies, this book becomes a little bit heavier in my hand. Who are the people who are your heroes? Are they the men and women who are standing around you right now? You can sit down. As I look at those whose fingerprints are all over my life, and when they die, inwardly I cry, no, no. Because I realize, now it's me. Me. Now it's us. Can I tell you something that might not have occurred to you, but I do not want you to miss this morning? Your teachers and administrators who just were standing, they want to pass on information to you. They want you to know in which century the war between the states took place. But please don't see them just as those who stand at a chalkboard shouting, "Pay attention." They are the men and women whom God is using right now in your life to line the sidelines of your life, shouting, "Run. Run." Your time with them is short. A day will come when they too will fade into glory, and you will hear their voice no more. And when the weight of that reality hits you, you realize you're it. You're it. What will people, class of 2012, 2013, 14, 15, what will people write about your class 50 or 60 years if Jesus tarries? Well, that class, well, they look good. They all graduated, got into the college of their choice. No one got pregnant. All got comfortable paying jobs, good-looking spouses, obedient children. They had fabulous vacations. Or will they write this? Since they were surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, they laid aside everything which hindered them, the sin which so easily ensnares, and they ran. With endurance, the race set before them. They fixed their eyes on Jesus, the author and finisher of their faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Don't waste your life, please. Run well, follower of Jesus. Spirit of the living God, I ask that you would fill us with strength to run the race set before us with endurance, throwing off all sin that entangles us. I pray that you would fix the eyes of those in this room on you, your Son, that they would know your story, they would understand the significance they have in your plan, that future generations would see us as the cloud of witnesses cheering others on. We ask this in the matchless name of Jesus. Amen.